Have you ever wondered what would happen if one of the most quoted sentences spoken by Jesus was never understood the way he intended? For nearly 2,000 years, millions have repeated the words, "Judge not," believing they were forbidden from recognizing truth, confronting deception, or exercising spiritual discernment. But what if that was never his message? What if a single forgotten Aramaic word changed the entire meaning of this teaching? Today, we will return to the language Jesus actually spoke and uncover why this ancient word still has the power to transform the way you see yourself, others, and even God. For centuries, the original spoken teachings of Jesus became filtered through successive translations and theological traditions. As Christianity expanded beyond the Aramaic-speaking world, many of his original expressions were replaced by Greek and later Latin equivalents, often preserving the general idea, but losing the depth carried within the sounds and structure of his native language. Then, in 1945, near Nag Hammadi, in Egypt, a remarkable archaeological discovery changed the landscape of biblical studies. Buried for centuries in sealed jars were ancient Gnostic manuscript texts never included in the official biblical canon that preserved early traditions and teachings connected to the world in which Jesus lived. While these writings are distinct from the canonical Gospels, their discovery confirmed the richness of the spiritual language and concepts circulating in the first centuries, drawing renewed attention to the original Aramaic expressions that shaped the ministry of Jesus. There is an important reason. Jesus taught in Aramaic rather than Greek or classical Hebrew when speaking to ordinary people throughout Galilee. Aramaic was the living language of daily life, the language that reached the heart before it reached the mind. Every spoken expression carried rhythm, determination, and emotional force beyond a dictionary definition. Many ancient spiritual traditions understood that these sounds themselves held profound significance, and countless believers today see the careful pronunciation of these ancient words as a way of reconnecting with the original message of Jesus, awakening something deeply rooted within us, what many describe as our original design, our original spiritual identity. That is why the exact word and its pronunciation matter. The forgotten word for today's journey is du, unpronounced, dune, meaning to judge, pronounce judgment, condemn, or render a verdict. Notice how much broader this is than the simple English word judge. It is not describing wise discernment. It is describing the act of placing yourself in the position of ultimate authority over another human soul. When Jesus spoke these words in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 7, he was not telling his followers to ignore evil or pretend that truth and falsehood are the same. He was exposing something far more dangerous. Every time we condemn another person's heart, believing we fully understand their motives, we quietly assume a place that belongs to God alone. That changes everything. How often have people remained silent in the face of injustice because they feared they were judging? How often have others excused destructive behavior by quoting a sentence they never fully understood? A mistranslation, or at least an incomplete understanding, can reshape generations. Whenever you hear dune, pronounced dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict, remember that Jesus was drawing a line between discernment and condemnation. One protects wisdom, the other imprisons the human heart. And once you understand that difference, the entire Sermon on the Mount begins to open in a completely new way. Imagine standing among the people gathered on the hillsides of Galilee. They lived in a world where public reputation could determine whether someone was accepted, rejected, honored, or permanently condemned by the community. Religious authorities often divided people into categories. Some were considered righteous, while others were treated as impure, unworthy, or beyond restoration because of their past actions. Into that atmosphere, Jesus spoke words that challenged the human desire to pronounce final verdicts. He was not asking people to ignore wrongdoing or to abandon wisdom when facing deception. He was exposing the hidden danger of believing we can fully define another human soul. A single mistake can reveal an action, but it can never reveal the complete story of a person's life. This is where dune, pronounced dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict, becomes deeply personal. It describes more than noticing that something is wrong. It describes closing the case before mercy, truth, and transformation have been allowed to speak. It is the moment when an opinion becomes a permanent sentence in the heart. Think about how quickly this can happen in everyday life. One painful conversation can become the reason we decide that another person will never change. One failure can become a label. One misunderstanding can become a wall. One season of weakness can become the identity we attach to someone forever. Yet Jesus consistently looked beyond the labels placed upon people. He saw tax collectors, sinners, strangers, and rejected individuals as lives that could still be restored. He did not deny their choices. He did not call darkness light. But he refused to believe that their worst moment had the authority to determine their final destiny. This reveals the difference between discernment and condemnation. Discernment recognizes behavior and responds with wisdom, while condemnation declares that hope has already disappeared. The first protects the heart. The second hardens it. Every verdict we continually speak over others also begins shaping our own inner world. A heart trained to condemn eventually uses the same voice against itself. The criticism directed outward returns inward. Every mistake becomes shame, every weakness becomes failure, and every delay begins to feel like proof that restoration will never come. Perhaps this is why Jesus invited people into mercy before certainty. Mercy does not deny truth, but it remembers that no human being possesses the entire story. Only God sees the hidden wounds, the silent battles, the prayers never spoken aloud, and the transformation still unfolding beneath the surface. The next teaching of Jesus reveals why our vision must be healed before we attempt to correct another person on Mark. He exposes a danger almost everyone overlooks. If this teaching already feels this deep, imagine having a full guide with deeper explanations of Jesus's true teachings in Aramaic. You'll find the link to the study guide in the comments. And the best is yet to come. In the next chapters you'll discover what could change everything for you. Immediately after warning against condemnation, Jesus spoke about the speck in another person's eye and the beam hidden within our own. These words were not a separate lesson. They revealed the reason human judgment becomes so dangerous. The problem is not that we notice what is wrong in another person, but that we often assume our own vision is perfectly clear. Every person sees through memories, fears, wounds, expectations, and past experiences. We may believe we are observing someone objectively, while hidden emotions are already shaping what we see. A painful betrayal can make every new relationship look suspicious. A childhood wound can make honest correction feel like rejection, even when no rejection was intended. This is why spiritual humility matters. It does not mean doubting every truth, but recognizing that our understanding may still be incomplete. When Jesus used the idea behind dune pronounced dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict, he was warning against certainty without self-examination. A final verdict says there is nothing more to learn. It closes the door before the full story has entered the room. This happens in families when one mistake becomes a permanent identity. It happens in friendships when assumptions replace conversation and silence begins speaking louder than truth. It happens in spiritual communities when people believe they can measure another person's worth through outward appearances, public failures, or a season of weakness. Yet Jesus followed a different path. He asked questions when others rushed toward accusations, and he created space for repentance when others demanded immediate rejection. He confronted hypocrisy with courage. He exposed deception without hesitation. But his purpose was never humiliation for its own sake. He corrected actions without denying the value of the person standing before him. He revealed truth while leaving the door of transformation open. That distinction changes everything. Discernment examines what happened. Condemnation declares what a person will always be. Discernment can establish boundaries. Condemnation turns those boundaries into prisons built from resentment, pride, and fear. The teaching of the beam and the speck invites us to pause before speaking. It asks us to examine the condition of our own heart before attempting to correct someone else's path. What fear is influencing my reaction? What old wound is shaping my conclusion? What part of the story have I not yet heard? These questions do not weaken wisdom. They purify. When the beam is removed, vision becomes clearer. Truth can then be spoken without hatred. Correction can be offered without humiliation, and boundaries can be established without revenge. The greatest revelation is still ahead, because Jesus connected this teaching to a spiritual law that determines the measure returning to our own lives. The measure Jesus spoke about was not merely a warning about future punishment. It was a revelation about the way the human heart creates the world it eventually experiences. What we repeatedly release toward others begins shaping the atmosphere within us. Suspicion produces distance, condemnation produces fear, and resentment slowly teaches the soul to expect rejection everywhere. This is why the words of Jesus reach far beyond public behavior. He was revealing that every judgment carries an inner consequence before it ever reaches another person. A harsh verdict may appear to place someone else beneath us. In reality, it teaches our own mind to live under the same merciless standard. The voice used against others eventually becomes the voice we hear in private. It follows us into moments of failure, weakness, regret, and uncertainty. Then every mistake feels final. Every delay feels like rejection. Every unanswered prayer begins to sound like proof that God has withdrawn His mercy. But that was never the spiritual life Jesus came to awaken. When He warned against dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict, He was not removing accountability. He was rescuing the heart from becoming a courtroom where no one is ever allowed to change. Accountability can protect what is sacred. Condemnation tries to decide who is still worthy of restoration. One establishes a boundary. The other creates an identity. This difference becomes especially important when someone has caused real harm. Mercy does not require pretending that pain never happened or allowing destructive behavior to continue without consequence. You can forgive and still create distance. You can love and still say no. You can release condemnation without surrendering wisdom. That is the freedom hidden inside this teaching. You are not required to carry another person's final sentence. You are only responsible for responding with truth, courage, and a heart that refuses to become what wounded it. This is how spiritual authority begins. It is not the power to control others. It is the power to prevent another person's darkness from taking root inside you. Your thoughts become clearer. Your peace becomes steadier. And your decisions are no longer controlled by resentment. You stop rehearsing the same offense. You stop imagining conversations that never happen. You stop allowing an old wound to speak with authority over your present life. This does not happen because the past suddenly becomes acceptable. It happens because your future becomes too sacred to remain imprisoned by it. That is why the measure matters. The heart that offers mercy becomes capable of receiving mercy. The heart that leaves room for transformation begins recognizing that transformation is still possible within itself. And when this truth becomes a daily practice, something begins to change, not only in your relationships, but in the way you hear the voice of God. Right now, you might be asking yourself, why am I only discovering this truth now? Don't worry. We thought about that. We're here to help you go deeper with a guide made for this journey. The link is in the comments. There is one final layer of this teaching that reaches deeper than relationships. It reveals why many people struggle to feel close to God even while praying every day. They have carried condemnation for so long that they unconsciously expect condemnation from heaven. The image formed within the heart becomes the image projected onto God. A person who constantly measures others by their failures begins believing God must be measuring them in the same way. Every weakness then feels like evidence that divine love has been withdrawn. But Jesus revealed a Father who sees beyond appearances. He described a God who knows what is hidden, who sees what is done in secret, and who understands the need before the prayer is spoken. This does not erase responsibility. It places responsibility inside a larger reality called mercy. Mercy does not say that choices have no consequences. Mercy says that consequences do not have the final word over a life willing to return. That is why condemnation is so spiritually destructive. It convinces people that change is impossible before the journey has even begun. It tells the wounded that they are their wound, the guilty that they are their failure, and the rejected that they will always remain outside. But the ministry of Jesus repeatedly contradicted that message. He restored people who had been publicly shamed. He welcomed those whom society had already defined, and he called new life out of places others had abandoned. This is the opposite of dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict. A verdict closes the story. Grace opens another chapter. Perhaps there is someone you have silently defined by what they did years ago. Perhaps that person is you. You may still be living beneath words spoken in anger, labels placed upon you by family, or accusations that became part of your identity. The teaching of Jesus invites you to separate truth from condemnation. Truth may say that a mistake was real. Condemnation says that the mistake is all you will ever be. Truth may reveal where healing is needed. Condemnation insists that healing will never come. Once you recognize this difference, you can begin releasing every false sentence that has followed you into the present. You do not need to deny the past. You need to stop allowing the past to pronounce the final word. The authority to define your future does not belong to the person who misunderstood you. It does not belong to the moment when you failed. Your future is shaped by what you choose to practice now, when you choose discernment without hatred, boundaries without revenge, and truth without humiliation. You begin walking in the freedom Jesus intended. You no longer become blind to wrongdoing. You become free from the poison of carrying it. That freedom prepares the heart for the daily practice you are about to learn. Because this teaching only transforms life when it becomes more than an idea. Tomorrow morning, before speaking to anyone or opening your phone, sit quietly for 1 minute. Place one hand over your heart and allow your breathing to become slow and steady. Bring to mind one person you have judged harshly, or one part of yourself you have continued to condemn. Do not excuse what was wrong, and do not force yourself to feel something that is not yet real. Simply recognize the verdict you have been carrying. Then speak unpronounced dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict 3 times with calm intention. After the first repetition, say within yourself, I release the need to know the whole story. After the second repetition, say, I choose discernment without condemnation. After the third repetition, say, the final verdict belongs to God. Remain silent for a few breaths. Notice where tension appears in your body. It may be in the chest, the throat, the shoulders, or the stomach. Do not fight it. Let the tension reveal where judgment has been stored. As you breathe out, imagine releasing the sentence you have repeated against another person or against yourself. You are not declaring that the past was acceptable. You are declaring that the past will no longer rule the present. Practice this every morning for 7 days. During the day, whenever you feel the impulse to define someone's entire character by one action, pause before speaking. Ask one simple question. Am I seeing clearly, or am I trying to pronounce a final verdict? That pause is where transformation begins. It creates space between the wound and the reaction. It allows wisdom to enter before anger takes control. At night, review one moment when you judged quickly. Do not condemn yourself for it. Simply return to unpronounced dune, meaning to judge, condemn, or render a final verdict, and remember that the teaching applies to the way you see yourself as well. This is not a ritual of denial. It is a discipline of spiritual clarity. Over time, you may notice that your words become slower, your reactions become wiser, and your peace becomes harder to disturb. You will still recognize what is wrong. You will still protect what is sacred. But you will no longer carry the impossible burden of deciding who is beyond mercy. That burden was never yours. The purpose of this practice is not to make you passive. It is to make you free enough to act without hatred, and strong enough to speak truth without becoming cruel. This is how the teaching of Jesus moves from ancient language into daily life. It begins with one word, it continues with one pause, and it becomes visible through the way you choose to see another human being. Just a quick reminder, the transformation guides for a fuller life are waiting for you, right there in the comments. Before you leave, if this message touched your heart or brought new understanding into your life, write the word restoration in the comments below. Your testimony may encourage someone else who is seeking healing and renewal. Thank you for sharing this moment of ancient wisdom with us. Until the next revelation, walk in peace, walk in freedom, and leave every final verdict to God.